Hello everyone. In today's video you will meet Savannah Brooks, a former Christian model who died during plastic surgery and had a near-death experience that will give you complete chills. She saw hell, talked to Jesus, and came back with a shocking revelation, the sin that is taking 99% of women there. It's strong, it's real, and you need to listen until the end. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and comment here from which city you are watching. Now take a deep breath and prepare yourself. My name is Savannah Brooks. I'm 36 years old. I was born in Los Angeles, California, and until recently, if you typed my name on Instagram, a page with more than 600,000 followers, I was what a lot of people called a model Christian, a mix of beauty, faith, and lifestyle that inspired women around the world. My posts always came with verses, motivational captions, and impeccable photos. I prayed before every photo, and always thanked God for making me bright in a dark world. But what no one saw was the war that existed between the altar of vanity and the call of the Spirit inside me. Since I was 17, when I started modeling, I was told that my beauty was my greatest gift. When I converted at 22, I thought I could use this advantage to reach more people. But little by little, my faith became a frame for the mirror that I could no longer stop looking at. At 35, I started to feel like I was past my time in the imaging market. I looked at old photos and thought, I need to stay relevant, otherwise no one will listen to me. That's how I decided to have facial rejuvenation surgery, something common where I live, where pastors and influencers share the same dermatologist. I convinced myself that it was just taking care of the temple of the Holy Spirit. But deep down, I knew there was more ego than zeal in that decision. The procedure was simple, a combination of lifting, fillers, and a nose touch-up. Nothing much, they said, but something went wrong. Very wrong. When I woke up from the anesthesia, something was strange. I could hear the people in the room, but my vision was blurred. A nurse was shouting my name, doctors were running, and I felt like I was moving away. It was then that my vision went out. Everything went black. Not an ordinary nigga. It was like falling into an abyss of ink. There was no sound, no form, no time, and in the next instant, I left my body. I saw myself lying on that stretcher, pale, motionless. The monitor triggered alerts. My face was covered in blood. My chest heaved in spasms. But what really scared me was that I didn't feel anything. No pain, no emotions. Only a deafening silence. As if heaven had closed the door. And that's when the worst started, because before I could even ask myself, am I going to heaven? Something pulled me down. An invisible force. A vortex of darkness. It wasn't a tunnel of light. It was a fall. And everything in me screamed, that wasn't supposed to happen to someone like me. But it happened, and what I saw destroyed me inside. I never imagined I would die like this. Not for a second did I think that cosmetic surgery could be the portal to eternity. But when that force pulled me down, I understood that it wasn't my body that was in danger. It was my soul. The descent was not quick. It was like slowly falling into a place that rejected me, but at the same time, called me. The air around me was thick like liquid smoke, and as I sank, I began to hear voices. At first they were whispers like distant thoughts, but soon they became shouting, whining blasphemies. My spirit trembled. Is this how hell begins? I thought. But that was just the threshold. When the darkness lifted for a moment, I could see. And what I saw, it's impossible to put into words without burning inside. It was an endless valley, a burning desert, but without physical heat. A fire that did not touch the body, but directly burned the consciousness, the spirit. It was as if every soul there was combusting with regret. I saw women. Lots of. Thousands. Their shapes were distorted, shadows of who they once were, but their faces, Oh, their faces still carried traces of beauty. Beauty that now was a curse. Some still held mirrors in their hands. Others had their eyes sewn shut with golden threads that shone, as if they had been blinded by their own vanity, and they were all crying. Not with tears, and there was no longer a body cow, but with moans that seemed to cross dimensions. Each scream was a sentence, every lament an echo of lost opportunities. Why? I mentally asked, desperate. It was then that a presence formed to my left. It was not a human figure nor a traditional angel. It was a being enveloped in piercing light, but with a look that left no doubt. It was him. Jesus. But not the gentle Jesus of the paintings. It was the lion, the just, he who judges with eyes of fire. Without moving his lips, he spoke directly to my soul. You built an altar, but not for me. I felt like every memory of mine was thrown in my face. The videos I made showing devotionals, but always with perfect makeup. The clothes chosen more for aesthetics than for modesty. The reels with verses, but edited to impress. And then he pointed to the valley before us. This is the place where beauty rests that was used to seduce rather than sanctify. I saw influencers, gospel singers, preachers, but also ordinary women, housewives, young people, mothers, all there for a common root, the vanity that took the place of truth. 99% of the women who come here come this way, Savannah. Those words were like a blade. Vanity is the perfume of hell when used to dim my glory. I wanted to scream, run away, deny it, but inside me, I knew. I always knew. I just didn't want to face it. And at that moment I understood. I was seeing the real destiny behind many likes, lots of praise, lots of likes in the name of God, but far from his heart. And Jesus looked at me once again and said something that cut through everything that was left in me. You thought you were my spokesperson, but you were just a mirror of your generation. When Jesus said I was the mirror of my generation, I felt my spirit shatter. It wasn't a compliment, it was a sentence. At that moment, something formed in front of me. A mirror, but not made of ordinary glass. It was as if he were made of liquid, living, pulsating light. And when I saw myself in it, I didn't see Savannah on social media. Not even the one who prayed in services. Not even the one who cried in stories with verses. What I saw was the real woman behind the spiritual makeup. My intentions, my motivations, my vanities camouflaged by faith. They were all there, naked, exposed, no excuses. I saw the 22-year-old girl crying at the altar and saying, Lord, use my life. But then I saw this same young woman a few years later refusing a missionary campaign because she wouldn't value her image. I saw when I prayed for God to open doors, but deep down, I wanted the spotlight. I saw it when I told a follower that everything was for the glory of God, but I spent 2 hours editing the perfect caption, worried about engagement, and each scene was accompanied by a feeling so heavy that it seemed impossible to continue standing. But I didn't have a body there. Even so, I fell inside. It was then that Jesus approached the mirror and touched the surface. The image began to change. I saw other women, known and unknown, and what he said to me was engraved like fire on my conscience. It's not the visible scandals that condemn Savannah, it's the subtle sins that are justified with spirituality. I saw women who prayed, who fasted, who sang, but who were spiritually dead inside. Not because of a lack of gifts, but because of an excess of appearance. They did not live for God. They lived to be admired. In the pulpit, on networks, in churches. It was a constant cult of themselves. Have you never wondered why so many women who call themselves mine do not reflect my holiness? When he asked. And I could only stammer. I thought everything was fine, that it was normal. But the answer came firmly. with no room for lies. You knew. You always knew. You just chose to ignore it. It was then that I saw faces, thousands of women passing like a river before the celestial mirror, some in elegant clothes, others in simple outfits, some with thousands of followers, others anonymous. But they all had something in common. They were judged by what no one saw, what was in their hearts. And what the mirror showed was relentless. Whoever sought God was separated. Whoever sought the stage, I was revealed. I was shaking inside. Shame consumed me. There was no way to argue. And then Jesus said something that marked my soul forever. The beauty you idolize here disfigures you there. At that moment, I wished I had never had that surgery, not because of the pain, but because she revealed what was already rotten inside me. The fear of getting old, the desire to be adored, insecurity disguised as self-care. That's what he saw. This was what the spiritual mirror showed. And when I thought nothing could get worse, he pointed the finger for myself. And then the mirror swallowed me, and I was taken to an even deeper place, where appearance lost all value, where there was only absolute truth about who I really was. I was drawn into that mirror of living light, as if passing through God's own judgment. The sensation was of falling again, not into a dark abyss as before, but into a place where everything was too bright, an uncomfortable cutting glow that stripped me from the inside. It was like Ali, there was nowhere left to hide anything. When I opened my eyes, or whatever allowed me to see in that state, I realized I was in a huge room. There was no ceiling. There was no floor. It was a kind of spiritual chamber where everything that existed was true and consequence. Around me, human figures began to appear, hundreds, maybe thousands, and all carried masks in their hands. Some were brilliant, some delicate, some monstrously beautiful, and one by one they approached a fire that burned in the center of the room as if they were attracted by it. And there they placed their masks on the burning altar. The fire reacted. In some, the flame danced gently. In others, it exploded as if revealing something hidden for centuries. I saw well-known women, celebrities of faith, influencers, spiritual leaders. But I also saw young people, ladies, teenagers. It was as if an entire female generation was being confronted with what was hidden behind the makeup of religion. And then I realized that I was also holding something. It was a mask, the most beautiful of all I've ever seen. It shone like gold. I had my features, my expression, my Christian persona. It was the me I built for years, the strong, beautiful, pious, influential Savannah. And at that moment, I panicked. I can't burn this, it's all I am. It was then that I heard the voice, not shouted, don't be mad, but pure, firm, indisputable. If you don't burn this, you will never be who I created you to be. My hands shook. The fire seemed to call me. A part of me wanted to run to protect my image, but another begged for release. Finally, with tears that didn't flow, but that seemed to burn straight from the soul, I stretched the mask towards the fire. And when I put it there, everything burned. Not just the mask, but also the titles, the followers, the phrases made, the edited photos, the catchphrases, the likes, the filters, the subtle lies, the comparisons, the envy, self-promotion, insecurity disguised as spiritual, empowerment. Everything turned to ashes in the presence of a God who is not impressed by performances. At that moment, I fell to my knees. Or rather, I was folded inside. And then it came the most sacred silence I have ever experienced. Jesus was there, standing before me. But now not with eyes of judgment, but with eyes of pain. A pain that wasn't anger. It was deep compassion. Now, you know what 99% don't want to know. Vanity is not just a sin, it's a betrayal. I wanted to die again just to erase the shame of everything I did. But he lifted me up, not with hands, with love, and he said, "There's still time, but you'll see what happens to those who refuse to burn their masks." And at that moment I was taken to an even more terrifying place, where the fire no longer purified, it only condemned. When Jesus said that I would see what happens to those who refuse to burn their masks, I felt a deep chill, not in my body but in my soul. It was as if something in me already knew what was coming next. It wasn't a warning, it was a living sentence. I was led by him along a path that looked like a narrow, dark corridor, as if carved inside a living rock. With each step, the walls vibrated with a muffled sound, a sound that I soon understood to be suppressed screams, screams that could no longer echo, screams of souls, silenced for eternity. We arrived at the entrance to an endless gallery. There were open doors on each side, like spiritual cells, and inside each, a woman, alone, prey, distant, but aware, completely aware. What shocked me most is that, contrary to what people imagine about hell, there were no demons whipping, no fire consuming the body. The punishment was conscious, psychological, spiritual. It was knowing everything they could have been, everything they heard, preached, sang, and ignored. I saw one of them sitting in front of a mirror that reflected nothing but emptiness. She held a transparent cell phone in her hands like a digital idol. I tried to scroll infinitely, but there was only darkness. She repeated, "But I talked about him. I talked about him." Another wore a formal dress with an opaque crown on her head and walked in circles on a stage of smoke, but there was no audience, just the muffled sound of applause coming from nowhere. She murmured, "I thought I was being used by God. I saw shepherdesses, singers, influencers, simple servants, young leaders, women who were lights here on earth, but who dimmed before the real light." And then Jesus said in a broken voice, "They knew, but they loved the image more than the essence." The place was called Corridor of Irreversibles, and I asked with what strength I still had left. "They don't have a chance anymore?" He lowered his head as if feeling the deepest pain there is. And he replied, "The time of grace ends when the hardened heart no longer responds to the truth." It was then that something even more horrible happened. I saw a version of myself in that hallway. There I was, younger, even more vain, with the Bible in my hand and a smile on my face, but my eyes empty. I knew what she represented. That's what I would become if you ignored that warning. And then Jesus turned to me and said something that tore at my soul. "I didn't bring you here just to see. I brought you to decide." And in that instant, everything disappeared. The hallway, the cells, the women, until his presence. And I found myself alone, in a place where there was only a choice: continue on the broad path that leads to eternal vanity, or be consumed by holiness and never be the same again. And that's when he returned, and he extended his hand to me. "If you want to live, and it will hurt, but it will free you." When Jesus stretched out his hand and said, "If you want to live, it will hurt, but it will free you," I knew. This wasn't just a choice between heaven and hell. It was a call to born again, but not how I imagined, not with heavenly applause or harps playing in the background. It would be a painful birth. Ripper, one spiritual birth. I touched his hand, and at the same moment, an overwhelming force enveloped me, my body, or rather my essence, and was thrown as if by a whirlwind into myself. I was taken to a place so deep that not even the screams of hell could reach. It was dark, silent, but not the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of the delivery room in heaven. I was alone, lying down, folded in on myself like a fetus, in formation. I felt pain that came from memories, from lies that I believed, from masks that I shaped myself. Pain of confronting who I was without filters, without applause, without likes. And then I heard a voice, soft but firm. The time has come to break with everything that prevented you from being born to me. It was as if every cell in my soul began to separate from the old Savannah. I felt like layers were being peeled away, not of skin, but of identity. The daughter of Instagram, the media Christian, the clean feed preacher, the woman who cried for the camera, but smiled proudly. In the mirror, everything was being ripped away. I screamed, not with the mouth but with the soul. A cry that said, "Take me away from myself." And that's when the birth happened, as if something had been broken inside me, a spiritual bag, a veil of deception, and from within that darkness where I hid myself, a new version of my soul emerged, fragile, white, gross, pure. I saw myself as a spiritual baby, but no makeup, no platforms, no frames, just me, for the first time. And when I opened my eyes, Jesus was kneeling beside me. He smiled. "Now yes, you can live." He lifted me tenderly and I felt that I was live. So light. All the baggage of appearance, all the concern with the body, aesthetics, perfection, disappeared. And instead of that, there was a good void, a space finally available, to be filled by something eternal. It was at that moment that I saw a door in front of me. It wasn't like the previous ones. It wasn't made of flames or darkness. It was simple, made of wood, marked with blood. Jesus took me to her and said, "You will come back, but not like before. You will come back with a mission, with a seal." And he placed his hand on my chest. An indescribable heat took over me. It wasn't sensual, was sacred, as if my heart was being rekindled by a live coal from the altar of heaven. "Now, Savannah, you are my witness. Don't preach with beauty. Preach with truth, and if need be, with scars." I said yes, and when I walked through that door, the world swallowed me again. Walking through that door was like being sucked into a river of fire and light at the same time. It wasn't physical pain. It was a spiritual strength so intense that I felt myself tearing myself apart inside when crossing the limit between eternity and time. Suddenly, everything changed. Sounds, flashes, screams. I opened my eyes. Or, rather, I was pushed back into them. My carnal eyes. I was in an operating room surrounded by doctors, masks, surgical lights on the ceiling. I heard someone shout, "She's back. We have a pulse." My entire body was shaking. I panted, like a newborn who has just taken his first breath into the world. But the pain, oh, the pain was intense. Every cell seemed to burn, not because of the surgery, but because of what I had left behind. To old Savannah, I felt foreign inside myself, like someone who lived there but no longer belonged to that body, that image, that face. It was like waking up from a coma of identity. The nurse said, "You went into cardiac arrest during the procedure. There were more than 3 minutes, without a beat." 3 minutes? They were centuries into eternity. I was transferred to the ICU, and there I spent days unable to speak. But my mind was on fire, reviewing every face of hell, every tear, every word of Jesus, every masked woman, every version of me. When I was finally able to speak, the first thing I asked was, "Mirror." They brought me a small one, a pocket one. I looked, and I cried. Not because it was deformed, not even for fear of consequences, but why my reflection no longer said anything about who I was. The woman in the mirror was alive, but the one who was reborn on the other side, it was another. And it was There, in the cold ICU bed, that I said the truest prayer of my life. Lord, I don't want to be beautiful anymore. I want to be a saint. It was like a vote, a pact, a surrender. The doctors said my recovery was a miracle, that my vital signs reacted out of nowhere. But I knew the truth. Heaven gave it back to me, with a message. The day I was discharged, I refused the gifts from the clinic. They threw away my premium cosmetics, the clothes I had taken to post the results of the surgery. I deleted videos, contracts, photos. I was alive, but not for the feed. To the altar. When I left the hospital, I breathed the street air like someone stepping on earth for the first time. And I heard again in my spirit, "Now live, to warn." And that's when I understood. My mission was not to recover. It was to expose myself, not out of vanity, but for real. The days that followed my discharge were the loneliest of my life, and at the same time the holiest. I couldn't get back to my routine. The idea of opening Instagram, of organizing the image relaunch after surgery, made me feel nauseous. It wasn't physical, it was spiritual, because now I saw everything differently. Every spiritual self-help phrase, every God in charge with a perfect selfie, each photo on the altar with a hot filter and caption with a verse. Everything now smelled like sulfur to me. It was as if hell had learned to dress itself in verses. For days, I was locked in my room, praying, crying, fasting not out of habit but out of despair. I said, "Lord, how am I going to tell this? Who will believe it? They will call me crazy, exaggerated, fanatical." And the Holy Spirit always answered the same thing. Speak, not to be accepted. Speak so that some may be saved. That's how I understood that what I experienced, it wasn't just an experience, and it was a calling, not to preach, but for expose. Expose the darkness who wear high heels and hold a microphone. Exposing the cult of appearance disguised as empowerment. Expose the vanity that hides behind the scenes of ministries. Expose the way we use God as makeup to cover the rottenness of the soul. I spent days writing, not scripts, not strategies, but confessions, revelations. I reviewed every woman I saw in that corridor of hell. I reviewed each face burning with regret. And I wrote to them, for those who are still alive, for those who still have time. And it was then that the Lord gave me the most difficult direction of my life. Go back online, but this time, without filters. I trembled. Returning to that world of vanity now felt like returning to Egypt. But he was clear. You were saved from there to free others. I took a deep breath. I deleted all my old photos. I left just one, a black image with a sentence. I saw hell, and Jesus showed me the sin that is taking thousands of women there, and I went to sleep. The next morning, when the post had more than 50,000 likes, thousands of comments, some scoffed, others mocked, but hundreds of women were crying, begging, awakening. It was the beginning. The following week, I did the first live. No makeup, no ring light. With a trembling voice, red eyes, exposed soul. I told everything. Hell, the mirror, the corridor of irreversibles. And at the end, he said, "If today you are still breathing, there is still time to burn your mask, because what makes you admired by men may be separating you from God." The live was interrupted due to complaints, but I knew. The seed has been planted, and Jesus whispered, "Now prepare yourself, because war will come, but also harvest will come." The live went down due to violation of community guidelines. Ironic, no? Talking about hell and the sin of vanity was too much for a platform full of influential Christians, but with hearts as fragile as their filters. The next day, I lost more than 120,000 followers. Brands canceled contracts. Ministry friends silenced me. I was called a heretic, an extremist, a disgrace to the modern gospel. But what hurt most wasn't the abandonment of the men. It was seeing that many of those who were stoning me were the same ones who applauded me months before. The difference. Now I spoke the naked truth. No makeup, no performance, without the veneer of political correctness. And the truth is uncomfortable. The truth confronts. The truth tears the veil of platforms built on sand. But along with the chase, something happened. In the silence of public rejection, he began to sprout a secret revival. Women I had never seen before started writing to me. "Savannah, I threw away my masks after your video. I spent the night praying and burning everything I built without God." For the first time, I felt freed from the cult of my body. An army began to awaken, not at conferences, not on altars full of LEDs. But we locked rooms, in bathrooms with blurred eyes, in empty rooms where the Spirit was performing spiritual cesarean sections. A new type of woman began to be born. No agenda, no stage, no sponsorship, just true. And I understood what Jesus meant when he showed me the burning mirror. He doesn't want perfect women. He wants ripped women, surrendered, real. But the war only escalated. I was called to evangelical programs that wanted to listen to me, but tried to soften me. I was asked to take out the hell part, not to mention vanity with so much emphasis. I was offered a new image, a repositioning. I felt it in my spirit. It was the devil trying to return the mask. I refused everything. And with that, I lost even more. I was excluded from invitations, calendars, events. But I was also invited to places that were previously forgotten. Small groups, discreet meetings, houses where the sky descended like fire in silence. And there I saw something that no camera would capture. Women stripping away their vanity like someone ripping cancer out of their soul, crying for your own sins, and not just for emotional frustrations. Asking God for forgiveness not for failing in their plans but for ignoring His. It was a hidden revival. No hashtags, no spotlights. But what shook the heavens. And Jesus said to me one morning, "Now that's it, Savannah. Now you're preaching." Time passed. Not long, maybe weeks. But when the soul passes through the fire, time changes its weight. What previously took years to happen, God does in a dawn of total surrender. And one of those early mornings, while I was praying, kneeling, on the cold floor of my room, I felt something I had never felt before. It wasn't an emotion. It wasn't a mystical sensation. It was a seal, invisible, yes, but eternal. I felt as if something had been written over me with the finger of God Himself, not with paint, but with glory. And the sentence was simple. That belongs to the truth. I cried, not from pain. I cried like someone who was pardoned from the death penalty, like someone who received a new name, a new destiny, a new mission, and above all, a new identity. The Savannah who lived for the mirror, for other people's opinions, for applause disguised as faith. She died on that operating table. And now what was left was just the altar. An altar inside me, no pulpit, no crowd. A silent altar which burned day and night, demanding renunciation, truth, holiness. True. The word that hurt me was now the same one that healed me. And it was on this altar that God began to use me, no longer to thrill, no longer to attract, but for alert. I started visiting small churches, forgotten places, despised ministries, women who were about to give up, others who had been hurt by vain leaders. Young people who confused beauty with spiritual value. And to each of them I said, "You don't need to be seen. You need to be cleansed, burned, molded, until heaven sees you as a daughter, and not as a performance." I saw liberations that didn't happen with screams, but with whispers. I saw demons coming out of women who for years carried the idolatry of appearance as if it were self-love. I saw emotional healing so profound that psychologists could never achieve it. And I saw, above all, women being born again, like me. Today I no longer have contracts, no followers in the thousands, but I have a voice, a mission, and an altar lit inside me that doesn't go out. Sometimes I'm still tempted to go back, making up my message, softening the confrontation. But then I remember what I saw. From what I heard of those women in the corridor of irreversibles, and I say to myself, I wasn't saved to entertain, I was saved to awaken. And if you made it this far today, if you listened to this story to the end, it's not by chance. You may also need to tear off your mask. Maybe heaven is waiting for just one thing. Yes. A scream. An abandonment. Because as he told me, there's no point in appearing like me. Either you are, or you will be judged as someone you never were. And I've been there, I saw, and I came back to tell you, there's still time. But time is running out. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.